What I would like to speak to you about in this particular lesson, and then build on in the lessons to follow, is the idea of Christian discipleship. For many Christians, the idea of discipleship is a foreign concept. Not many of them know what it is. Or if they have some idea at all, they usually associate it with a name given to the 12 men who followed Jesus during his 3-year ministry, namely the 12 disciples. It usually does not occur to them that when they first believed the claims of Jesus and trusted in him as Savior, that thereafter, just like those 12 men so long ago, they were also expected to follow Jesus as King, to follow him as a disciple. And even if Christians did know that much, they may not realize that following King Jesus does not mean to simply relate to King Jesus as mankind's greatest role model. Despite popular belief, Jesus is not some sort of cosmic moral example to be emulated. In fact, if anyone has read very much about Jesus' life in the Bible, they would immediately find that following his example is about as possible as sprouting wings and flying to the moon. Yet, along these lines, Christians are often told to ask themselves a question like, what would Jesus do? Although this might be a sincere question, it tends to foster a super Christian mentality because it assumes some things that should not be assumed. In effect, there are 3 misguided assumptions that are found in the question, what would Jesus do? First of all, the question assumes that we can do the things that Jesus did, yet Jesus was and is God. He had the supernatural ability to do things that we would never be able to do. Think about it for a moment. During his life on earth, Jesus turned water into wine, walked on water, told the weather to behave, and even raised a man from the dead. More than that, Jesus died on the cross for the sins of his people and raised himself from the dead. All the work of Christ is miraculous and displays his supernatural, sovereign power over all things. Our work does not. Second of all, the question assumes that we can know what Jesus would do in a given situation. Yet, even the disciples were amazed at the way Jesus responded in every decision he made, like when a woman was brought to him who was caught in adultery, with perfect fidelity to love and perfect fidelity to truth. All of Christ's decisions display his perfect fidelity and authoritative wisdom. Our wisdom does not. Finally, the question assumes that we know who Jesus is, yet most people don't really know who Jesus is. He's certainly more than our moral example. He is not simply a role model like Ronald Reagan. In his divine identity, Jesus is infinitely more than we might expect, and we are called to worship him and relate to him as infinitely more than an example to be emulated. He is the Creator, Redeemer, Teacher, Savior, and King over all kings. His identity is explicitly divine, and his presence essential to life and magnificently glorious. Our presence is not. Since these things are true, we cannot simply ask ourselves, what would Jesus do, and then set off to follow his example. Following him does not mean looking at Jesus' life, externally copying his actions, and then attempting to be a super Christian. No. Following Jesus and Christian discipleship means something else entirely. To say it clearly and simply, discipleship is learning to depend. So when we seek to follow Jesus, instead of asking the question, what would Jesus do? It may be better to ask, are we learning to depend on King Jesus? Are we learning to depend on King Jesus' supernatural ability and miraculous work, not on our own work? Are we learning to depend on King Jesus' perfect fidelity and decisive wisdom, not on our own wisdom? Are we learning to depend on King Jesus' divine identity and glorious presence, and not on our own identity and presence? These are much better questions because Christian discipleship centers on following the actual living person of King Jesus in complete dependence. It is learning to follow him this very moment, the way a hungry child might follow after its mother, by being dependent. Or the way a blind man might hold on to and follow a man who can see, by being dependent. Or the way a drowning man might cling to the nearest boat, by being dependent. Therefore, Christian discipleship does not mean following Jesus by imitating the pattern of his life. It means following Jesus by depending on the actual person, believing who he is, trusting him as Savior, and following him as King. Or as the Bible puts it, to have faith. Faith equals dependence. Dependence equals believing. Believing equals trusting. Trusting equals following. All of these terms work together to describe the same thing: dependent faith. And that is the entire goal of Christian discipleship: learning to depend on the work, wisdom, and presence of King Jesus.